The history of the Minnesota Vikings is as rich as it is completely brutal. And for the last year, maybe two, John Boyce and his co-conspirators at Secret Base have been drowning in it. So I brought him on the show to talk about it. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, Luke Braun, and let's find some joy today. You can find the Locked On Vikings podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, whether it is a podcast listening app like SiriusXM. We're partnered with them. You can also catch the show on YouTube if you prefer a video component, or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. And for my hashtag everydayers, this should be a really fun one for you, because my everydayers who are listening to history episodes in the off season last year are going to get a whole bunch of that fun stuff rewarded as we talk to John Boyce of Secret Base, who is currently releasing his History of the Minnesota Vikings series. And this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This will be a very fun interview, and I want to get right into it. But for those of you who don't know the context here, John Boyce is a producer at Secret Base, which is a YouTube channel. They do the Dorktown series, which is a series of sort of storytelling mini documentaries and stuff, and some major history documentary series, 7 episodes on a given team, telling their history from start to finish. He's doing the Vikings right now. Last year, I did something similar. I made a 7-part series. It was almost exactly 7 hours total of Minnesota Vikings history storytelling content. You can find mine on my Patreon page at patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. You can find his at, if you just search up Secret Base Dorktown or Secret Base Vikings. So I brought him on and I picked his brain about storytelling and just the idea of the Vikings and what they represent, and had one of my favorite conversations I've ever had on this podcast. So let me just cut right into it. Please enjoy. All right, everybody, here with John Boyce, the one of the producers of Secret Base and their many history of a franchise series. Now they're doing the Vikings. John, I did a similar project a year ago. I did the history of the Minnesota Vikings, a 7-part series, very much inspired by your Falcons one. I was watching your Falcons one. It was like episode 3 or 4 of it when it was coming out. And I was like, man, it would be cool if someone did this for the Vikings. I think I will. I guess you had the same thought.
Yeah. I don't blame you for coming to that conclusion, because it was around that time. I think it was episode 4 of Falcons when we started getting into the 1998 NFC Championship game, and Alex and I kind of looked at each other and were like, we have to do the Vikings. Like, this is a team way more interesting than the franchise we're currently covering. We have to get to them. And I think you and I probably stumbled upon that realization at the same time. And our projects were even titled the exact same, if I recall, right?
Oh, yeah. I didn't try to title it anything too schwanky. And it's interesting because, look, I'm a Vikings fan. So mine comes from the perspective of, like, there's emotion in mine where I talk about, like, my experience watching Blair Walsh miss that kick in Seattle, and like where I was, and I was at the Minneapolis Miracle game, and like I told the story of being there and all that. And yours is much more of, like, I'll call it like the endeared outsider of, like, look at these guys, they're awesome. I have nothing to do with them, but just look at them. It like creates a way different tone on both sides.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, like, there isn't a single, our history of the franchise, like, is definitely not the authoritative one. It's definitely not the complete one. And we try to lean into that accordingly. We're like, yeah, we're outsiders. Like, we are not Vikings fans. And, if you talk to a Vikings fan like yourself, there's a lot of things that you're going to hear about that you won't hear about from us. So it's kind of like we kind of deliver a lot of pieces of the puzzle, but it's by no means a complete one. And I would like, as I told you at one point, while I was producing our history of the Vikings, as much as I wanted to, I did not watch much of yours because I didn't want to be sort of like inadvertently influenced or, I wanted to retain my sort of outsidery perspective. And now that we're like almost done, I kind of can't wait to jump into yours just to see exactly how we might have told different versions of the story toward, which gospel we decided to tell versus which gospel you decided to tell. But yeah, I mean, it was just an incredibly fun ride, start to finish.
One of the things that you guys covered that I didn't even notice, and I feel particularly embarrassed about this because as I was editing the first Hail Mary, the Drew Pearson pushed off thing, I looked at that for hours, editing that segment and making sure all the timings were right and making sure all the voiceover was right. I re-recorded the voiceover for that several times. I looked at that thing for days. I never noticed Alan Page was not on the field.
I didn't notice it either. All credit goes to my producer, Alex Rubenstein, and co-narrator, co-host. I don't know if there's anyone else on earth who would have noticed it because, I mean, I, like everyone else, like just took it for granted. Like, why would he not be on the field? So basically what Alex did is he wanted to really deconstruct every frame of that Hail Mary. And so he started with like identifying the personnel on the field. And he was like, he slacked me one day in March and he was like, I think I'm going crazy, but I do not see Alan Page. And I was like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah. And he spent like days looking over it. And he's like, no, that is not Alan Page. And so it sort of astonished us because first of all, I never would have seen it in a million years if he didn't catch it. And I don't blame anybody for not having noticed over the last nearly 50 years or so. It's something that Alan Page himself was aware of. And when I talked to him about it, it was very, very in character with him. He is much more than a football player, than a retired football player, as you know, gone on to do many astonishing things. And to him, he was just like, well, yeah, no, I wasn't on the field. I don't really know why. Never got an explanation, never asked for one. It is what it is. And I just moved on with my life. And I just found that to be astonishing and very, very on brand for Alan Page.
Stories can be told in so many different ways. And the approach to them, either by a fan or an outsider, or just the way, what endears you versus what endears me. Like, for example, in mine, the Super Bowl IV was the first two episodes build up to Super Bowl IV. And Super Bowl IV, I basically sell it as a Lamar Hunt revenge game because of what the Vikings did to the AFL. Mm-hmm. And your approach to that, completely different. Things are in a totally different order. And like, I think it's something where I know this is super cliche, but y'all just got to watch both. Just have to watch both things.
I think so. And I think from the small portions of yours that I allowed myself to watch, the one, like there's several different value adds. One with yours, there's a lot more footage to watch. And you get to kind of see.
I didn't really do the chart thing, both because I don't know how to do that, but also because I didn't want to like steal your style entirely. Like,
oh, my style is completely public domain. Anyone can steal it. I don't care about that. Yeah, that just means I have more cool shit to watch. So like, good deal on my end. But yeah, I mean yours, and then like you also, I didn't see this part that you just described, but when you key in on that revenge game element to Super Bowl IV, that's not really something we touched on, and I think. The only reason I didn't was really just time constraints. I was like, I kind of want to wrap this up in an hour. But that is such a cool angle. There's also the angle, like me being a Chiefs fan, like, hey, first Super Bowl.
Yeah, I was like sure you were going to go there.
I didn't let myself. I wanted to talk about like Len Dawson and like the gambling like drama that surrounded him at the time. That would have been like really interesting to dive into. But Alex and I have sort of agreed on a solemn vow that we will never do one of these projects about our own teams, just because we have decided. Honestly, like I would love to do one on the Chiefs, but I kind of pulled myself back because I'm like, they're not that interesting of a franchise. Like the Vikings are unique. I think if the Vikings were my team, I would probably let myself do it just because they are. And this is like coming from somebody who's totally not a Vikings fan. They are the most interesting NFL franchise, in my opinion, by like a good margin. The most interesting stories, most interesting human beings. So I wanted to kind of prevent myself from, I didn't want to go too far afield. I wanted to stay locked on them. Yeah.
So I have a couple other questions that I want to make sure I get to. So we're going to keep it rolling on the Locked On Vikings podcast. We'll be back with John in just a second. But before I do that, I would like to talk to you about shorts. Bird dogs are very good shorts. They make you look good, feel good. They fit better than regular shorts that are usually made out of like a stiff, restrictive cotton. And they fit slimmer through the thigh to give you a truly sculpted, delectable, and lickable look. Bird dogs, they have their own fabric, cloud knit fabric, that looks just like khaki. So it's like a khaki short you could wear golfing, but it stretches in a way that gives you a much slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. They have an anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your bird dogs off, we promise you. Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Here with John Boyce talking about the history of the Minnesota Vikings. I realized we got into this whole conversation and I never actually asked you to tell people where they can find this. So why don't you plug it real quick before we keep going?
Sure. Yeah. Our channel is called Secret Base. We make sports documentaries of various lengths and on various different sports. You can look up Secret Base on YouTube and we are there. We like to tell ourselves and tell everybody else that like we tell stories that just happen to be about sports. First and foremost, we just love a good story, and sports are the greatest story factor that exists. So that's us, and we hope you like it. The history of the Vikings is running right now. We're posting every Tuesday a new episode in a new decade,
and it's at 8 p.m. Central.
8 Minneapolis time for each episode. And yeah, you can drop in the chat. We're usually there live. And if you don't catch it live, of course, you can just watch it later.
Excellent. So I guess on a broader like artistic perspective, because it's like there's a philosophy that I have. Like everyone has an interesting story if you tell it right. But how you tell it is such a personal and artistic choice. Like, for me, what the Vikings have taught me as a fan is that sport, like how many things sports can give you that aren't winning a championship, because they can't do that. They haven't been able to do that. But how, like, sports have all these other values and what they can bring to somebody like Chris Carter saved his life, or what they can bring to somebody like Fran Tarkenton in terms of legacy, but also that's bittersweet because what is his legacy, right? And all that. So I guess in a super like auteur coffee house with jazz playing in the background kind of way, what is the story that you're telling here?
I guess it's sort of a meta answer because so with this kind of completes our trilogy of history of a team series. First, we did the Seattle Mariners and the Atlanta Falcons, and we concluded with the Minnesota Vikings. And we kind of tried to figure out what the core identity of each organization was. And we think of Seattle Mariners as like the protagonists of their sport, the protagonists of their fan base. Falcons are like the clowns, the court jesters, the trickster gods, just the cruel, ironic, they're just so many words for them.
Yeah.
But I would call the Vikings the great storytellers of football. And like toward the end, we actually use the line, we call them the great American storytellers because they pull at so many threads of American life and American culture and history, including a lot of the very most unflattering ones. And I think if you really want to understand America and the American sort of soul, for good and for bad, the Vikings are not at all a bad place to start.
They are, to me, a story about finding identity, I guess. In that, they had this cold weather identity and then they moved inside and then they had to figure out who they were again. And there's something that's so relatable to me about that. And it's funny that like it always finds a way to become a personal story. Like, and I think for me, like doing this project, you guys have done it 3 times. I have no idea how you've done that and you haven't melted into a puddle. Because that was the hardest I've ever worked in my entire life. But it like I found a voice I didn't have before. And I think that might be one of the great values of storytelling is that the storyteller can learn things about themselves, I guess. I don't know.
No, that's absolutely right. I think I would 100% identify with that idea. I think there's the process of talking through it that is really, really edifying. And really, like, there are a lot of things that you kind of feel and have a hunch about, and you don't even know that that's really what you're feeling until you really put it into words. And like, I mean, this whole thing is like, the theme, the identity of, the cold weather team. There are things like that where like, I knew going in, I kind of suspected that was a theme we would touch on, but I didn't really get a grasp on it until I actually tried to put it to words. And just the act of doing that. I mean, if I did one on, bananas or something, I think I would probably have a lot more of a clear idea of how I feel about bananas if I did a documentary about them. It works that way with everything.
For sure. It's funny. So as we are recording this, episode 4, which is the 80s for you, right? Yeah. Episode 4 is not out yet, so I haven't seen it. Of course, you know everything about it, but the 80s are so funny because they still feel like they're trying to be the same team, but they're like in a dome, and they're like, this guy's about baby Chuck Foreman. We'll take him instead of Marcus Allen. That's Darren Nelson. Like are still trying to replicate, Tommy Kramer. He's like our Fran Tarkenton replacement. We're going to ask him to do all the same things. And it makes me think about like times in my life where, I grew up in Minnesota and then I moved to Los Angeles. The times in my life where I had to kind of realize, I am where I am now and I'm not where I was before. And, like, I don't know, sports can do that and be this like mirror that we like apply our own lives to. And that is, I think, one of the great lessons that the Vikings can teach you is everybody remembers where they were when Gary Anderson missed that kick, and it sort of grafts onto you in a way that I don't think really anything else in culture does.
Yeah, that's an interesting, because it looks like you have the experience of like sort of, the remote NFL fan who's far away from the team that you root for. Same thing for me. I became a Chiefs fan when I was 6. And then when I was 9, we moved away from Kansas City. And I've just always been that remote NFL fan. And, I don't have any friends who are Chiefs fan. They're all fans of other teams. So it's like, there's very sort of like displaced experience that I think I kind of, now that you mention it, I kind of feel a piece of that in that feeling of like the Vikings moving into the Metrodome in 82 and like just kind of not quite being the same anymore. And that kind of not quite being who they were. It's an interesting thing. It's fun to kind of pick apart. We do talk about that a whole lot. And then we do talk about the 2015 TCF Bank game where they do have to come out in the cold for the first time in decades.
It's like they got to be themselves again. And it was.
Yeah. It's like the Minnesota elements, like saying goodbye to them like one last time, because for all we can tell, it's quite possible they'll never play outdoors in Minnesota ever again,
Almost certainly they will not. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's something I want to ask you about. There are so many people on YouTube that have sort of taken your style, I'll call it the chart party style of the Google Earth thing with lots of different graphs and stuff, and have spun it into totally different stories. I don't know if you know, there's a guy, this has nothing to do with football, I don't care, a guy named Bobby Broccoli that does stuff about like physics. And there's a guy that did the Syracuse men's lacrosse team and did an entire thing about that. How does it feel to have that many, and they're all phenomenal pieces, have that much creativity coming out with you almost as like a sort of a conduit?
It's kind of amazing. I mean, I never really expected to inspire anyone in any way. I just figured I was just making my goofy stuff, and I'm like, oh, here's a new thing. I feel like I'm capable of throwing into the mix and maybe making something new. But yeah, you said Bobby Broccoli. He makes some of the best videos on YouTube, just period. And I am not at all. Chemistry was my least favorite subject in high school. Kind of pretty much hated it. And all the same, like his videos are some of my favorite stuff to watch, period. It is top tier, just storytelling. It's so great.
So before I let you go, I guess first I just want to again say thank you both for doing this, but also for being the storyteller that you are. I know it sounds really hokey, but your stories have made me a better storyteller. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So thank you for just being you. And the second thing is, in the upcoming episode that will be out by the time this podcast goes out, so you can go to Secret Base right now and watch it if you haven't watched the whole series. But in that episode 4, is there anything fun that you would like to tease to get people to go over to watch it?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And I feel like storytelling is a two-way street. We always tell the story with the person on the other end. In this case, you know, in mind. And, you know, we just are really, really grateful that people show up and show support and, like, you know, genuinely seem to enjoy it. And that means the world to us. Yeah, as far as this episode, there was a guy named Les Steckel, who we talk about a lot.
That's a naughty word in Minnesota.
Yeah. I'm saying that word from like 6 states away, so I think I'm safe. But yeah, to me, that was hilarious. We do also talk about one of my favorite human beings who has ever lived, named Jerry Burns.
Yep.
I love him so much. And we, of course, we do a very long, involved statistical breakdown of his infamous 1989 rant, and the Bob Schnelker rant and everything that went into that. Because that's a great story. So, yeah.
After a game in which the Vikings won,
they did indeed win.
An overtime safety, I believe. Like, as exciting as it gets.
Yeah, it was all just. It was such a great show of friendship and loyalty because everybody had been just dragging Bob Schnelker in ways that I kind of felt were unfair. And he just had it. He wanted to stick up for his buddy. And I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah. It's so funny because he just talks like that. Like that's a normal Jerry Burns conversation. That's not an outburst. That's just him.
Oh yeah, and the thing I love about him is he doesn't even really seem like actually mad. He uses F-bombs in the way that I use or like or something like that. It's just a thing to put in between other words that he's saying.
It's just seasoning on the sentence. Yeah,
exactly. Beautiful way of speaking.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll let you go get back to it because I think you're not 100% finished, right? There's still some work to do on the last bits, or is it over?
We got a little bit in the way of like legal review. We got to make sure some footage use cases are all buttoned up because we spend a lot of time like checking on those and making sure we can make fair use arguments for them. But other than that, basically done. So yeah, really just excited to get the rest out there.
I'm so excited to watch it, man. Thank you so much for giving me your time. This is a really cool conversation.
Awesome, Luke. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks again so much to John. That was super, super, super cool and a conversation the likes of which, like, I don't think I'll ever be able to have a conversation like that with someone who shares that particular perspective with me again. That's super, super cool. And please do go watch the history. Go watch my history doc. Go watch their history doc. It's great. I'm actually like halfway through episode 4 as I record the rest of this episode. So I would like to talk a little bit about Jaren Hall for the rest of the show. And before I do that, I'm going to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. It's hiring season, and LinkedIn Jobs is the place to put your job opening if you are hiring. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best available qualified candidates, but with so many candidates out there, it's really hard to narrow all of that stuff down. Now, LinkedIn is the biggest job pool out there, so you will not be hurting for resumes, but They also have tools like screening questions, etc., to help you narrow down that big, giant, fat stack of applicants. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. And right now, LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free and very easily at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Just add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, and it will spread the word that you're hiring. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks a million to those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. Switching gears to the more current Vikings. So Jaren Hall's played a couple games now, and we've got a little bit of tape on him. Now, he's playing with the 3s and the 4s. So some of this tape is just wrecked by that. There's just times where you don't really get to see him go through a full read because he's getting sacked immediately because Christian Delorio's out there. Like, it's just going to be the world. And there's nothing he can do about it. So we can't really evaluate him. But we've got enough, I think, to be able to at least take a quick check-in of what he's doing. I have a Patreon post coming out probably around the same time as you're listening to this. If it's not out yet, it'll be out soon. Patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. And that's also where you find the history doc. But I went through some of his reps against the Tennessee game, and it's hard. There's like 7 reps that I found even remotely informative, which is a pretty small sample. So I still feel like I'm gathering information. But here is what I have noticed. For one, I think Jaren Hall, I watched him go through a full field read, which is nice. For a rookie quarterback, you don't want to see him staring down first reads. That was never going to be a thing for Jaren Hall. If you kind of trust what he did at BYU, but it's always nice to see that translate. I think the timing is still very slow on it, though. That is kind of what I noticed from what I could glean out of the Seattle game, which was very little. And then I sort of saw that again in Tennessee. So I'm going to guess I'm going to keep seeing it. We'll see a lot of him against Arizona, it sounds like. But it just is, it's, he goes, all right, alert, 1, 2, but it's just got to tighten up just a scotch. And I think that will help some of those pressures not necessarily get to him. And I think the main note that I have, I guess, if I were to be, the QB coach of the Vikings and put myself in his shoes, my main note would be when you're out and on the run, keep trying to find it. And if you see that throw, you can make that throw. And to trust his ability to throw on the run. There is a throw on the run that he delivers that is an absolute strike. I want to say it was Thayer Thomas on a corner route. Safety comes over, makes a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful play, and ends up breaking it up. But it was about as accurate of a throw as you could want on the run. And we've seen plenty of that at BYU as well. I know the Vikings like his ability to roll on the run, because here's the other thing. They called a bunch of rollouts for him. Whole bunch of keeper flood, short to long reads. Keeper is the McVay word for a rollout. And then they've got all these different little variations. There's a Bobby Peters book that is a great read. I highly recommend if you want to get to know offense better, go find Bobby Peters and whatever offense intrigues you the most. I highly recommend 2021 Rams, 2019 49ers, 2022 Dolphins. If you read those, you'll actually get a really good sense for what the Vikings are doing. Because there's bits and pieces of all of those in what Kevin O'Connell is doing this year. And he's got a guide to keepers, which all I think you need to know for this is there's a bunch of different variations for what the first guy is. So it's a 3-level read. There's a deep guy, a middle guy, and a check down, basically. But with these, they're short to long reads. So the quote unquote check down, the short guy is the first read. If he's there, just flip it to him, and it's kind of supposed to be a quick game of sorts. So just go get him, and he'll catch the ball and run. And then if he is covered up, well, then maybe we can get a chunk play, and then maybe this becomes a shot play or something. If you can't find anyone, just like huck it up to the deep guy and let's see if we can win a jump ball. The timing of those, by and large, really sound really nice with Jaren Hall, and you could go into Colin Thompson and Ben Sims on these. But if I were to put on my negativity glasses for a minute and find a concern in that, it's that there are so many rollouts and that I just want to know does he have the ability to run more drop back stuff? There are drop back concepts and stuff, and maybe that's just what the Vikings are calling because they want to see all of their 3s and 4s on rollouts in particular, just to see, make decisions on who's going to be on the practice squad and stuff. That is absolutely a possibility, and I'm not going to know the answer to that question, but it's the one I have. If that isn't the concern and they're just running a lot of rollouts for some other reason, then great, easy thing to drop, but I don't know, something to keep in mind. But really, when he's running out there in the flat, there's a couple of times where he's looking at something and he wants to throw it, and he could throw it. Either one time, Lucky Jackson was working back to the ball in a scramble drill. One time it was Dwayne McBride had actually won on a route, gotten separation, could have gotten a first down for him. He ends up scrambling and getting it with his legs. And in both cases, he looked at it and declined it in a world where I think ideally he has the confidence to chuck that one. And hey, look, if it's incomplete or whatever, we talk about why, but that's what I think I want from Jaren Hall, is to just, like, he sees it and he's just a little bit too safe with it right now. And hey, for a guy that came out of college with a whole bunch of hideous interceptions and stuff, playing it too safe is not something I'm ever going to be too mad at, but that's, like, I guess where he's at right now. But I kind of reiterate with Jaren Hall, and this is why I liked the idea of picking a day 3 quarterback this year so much, is that we don't need a thing from him this year. He is a 2024 player, and that's when we need him to be somebody that, the rookie beats out in a competition, go be the Davis Mills that CJ Stroud beats out by the end of the second preseason game. That's what we need from Jaren Hall, not, immediate ready to play day 1 production. And I think what we're seeing is with all the experience that he has out in college, you can see him very comfortable in the reads, and he doesn't look like an overwhelmed rookie. I think he's, they're making tweaks to his game, and so there's some work in progressness to it. But I guess what I'm saying is he's about where I expected him to be, which is under construction. And that's okay, because he's got time to be under construction. Tomorrow on the show, I'll talk about whatever news goes on. I believe there's going to be a joint practice to recap, so maybe we'll get into that. But I also have an interview with Arif Hassan, who just he does the Minnesota Football Party with me on Mondays and Thursdays over at Locked On Minnesota Sports, and he just released a Substack, which he came on to talk about a couple of pieces from that. So that was actually really fun to talk about. So look forward to that, and I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.